Welcome, brave souls. I am your guide into the realm of the unknown. Here, among these ancient tombstones and whispering trees, we uncover the most intriguing and terrifying stories that will send shivers down your spine. Encounter the supernatural in real life. Each story will transport you to a world where fear reigns and the line between the living and the dead blurs. Are you ready to face your fears? Let the stories begin. The old Broadmoor Asylum had stood empty for decades, its crumbling walls and broken windows a testament to a long-forgotten history of madness and suffering. The asylum had once been a place where the most dangerous and deranged were sent to be forgotten, where the cries of the tortured echoed through the halls, and where the line between sanity and insanity blurred until it disappeared completely. It was the perfect setting for a paranormal investigation show. The group of bloggers known online as the Paranormal Files had built a reputation for exploring the most haunted places on Earth. Led by the charismatic and fearless Jake, they had amassed a large following on social media. Each episode was a blend of history, horror, and the occasional jump scare that kept their audience on the edge of their seats. This time, they had something special planned. Broadmoor Asylum had never been explored by anyone since it was shut down in the early 1970s after a series of gruesome murders that were never fully explained. The stories surrounding the place were chilling. Whispers of ghostly apparitions, disembodied voices, and an overwhelming sense of dread that drove even the bravest trespassers away. Jake had managed to secure permission to film there overnight, and the team arrived just before dusk. The group consisted of Jake, the tech-savvy Nate, the camera operator Lily, the sensitive to the supernatural Claire, and the skeptic Mark, who was there to debunk any so-called paranormal activity. As they approached the asylum, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the building. The front doors creaked as Jake pushed them open, revealing a dark and musty interior. The air was thick with decay, and the only sound was the soft crunch of debris underfoot. "All right, let's get this set up," Jake said, his voice echoing off the walls. "Nate, get the cameras rolling. Lily, start with the wide shots of the entrance. Claire, you're on EVP duty. Mark, try to keep an open mind for once." They split up to set up their equipment. Nate busied himself with the cameras, adjusting the settings to account for the low light. Claire pulled out her EVP recorder, ready to capture any ghostly voices. Mark, ever the skeptic, wandered off on his own, muttering about how they were wasting their time. The first few hours were uneventful, just as Mark had predicted. They filmed a few segments for the show, discussing the history of the asylum and its dark past. But as midnight approached, things began to change. It started with a low hum that vibrated through the walls, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder by the minute. The group paused, exchanging uneasy glances. "Do you hear that?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Jake nodded. "It's probably just the old pipes. This place hasn't been maintained in decades." But the hum didn't sound like pipes. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It grew louder, becoming a steady drone that seemed to be coming from deep within the asylum. "Let's check it out," Jake suggested, leading the way down the main corridor. The walls were lined with peeling paint, and the flickering light from their flashlights cast eerie shadows. As they moved deeper into the building, the temperature dropped. Their breath fogged in front of them, and the drone grew louder until it was almost deafening. They reached a set of heavy double doors, the source of the sound. Jake pushed them open, revealing a large, empty room with a single chair in the center. The chair was old, its leather straps frayed and stained with what looked like dried blood. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. "What the hell is this?" Mark muttered, his bravado fading. "Some kind of ritual room?" Lily suggested, raising her camera to get a shot of the symbols. Claire suddenly gasped, clutching her chest. "Something's here," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I can feel it. It's watching us." Jake turned to her, concern etched on his face. "What do you mean?" Claire didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the chair in the center of the room. The drone had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on them. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the walls. Lily screamed, dropping her camera. They rushed to the doors, but they wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding them shut. Panic set in. Nate pulled out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The temperature in the room continued to drop, and their breath came out in clouds of mist. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his voice shaking. "Now." Jake tried to force the doors open, but it was no use. They were trapped. Then the lights went out. Total darkness enveloped them, broken only by the weak beams of their flashlights. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls pressing closer with each passing second. Lily fumbled for her camera, but it was too dark to see anything. The air grew thick with a metallic smell like rust or blood. And then they heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around them. It was the sound of something inhuman, something that should not exist. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. "I heard it," Jake replied, his voice tense. "Stay close. We need to find a way out." They moved as one, their flashlights sweeping the room for any sign of an exit. But there was nothing, just the walls, the symbols, and the chair. The growl came again, closer this time. Lily shined her flashlight towards the source of the sound, but there was nothing there. And then they saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its face was obscured by a veil of darkness. "What the hell is that?" Mark whispered, backing away. The figure moved towards them, its footsteps echoing in the silence. It didn't walk, it glided, as if it wasn't bound by the laws of this world. Jake raised his flashlight, but the beam seemed to pass right through the figure. It was as if it wasn't really there, just a shadow, a memory of something long gone. But the feeling of dread that washed over them was real. The air grew colder, and the growl turned into a low, menacing laugh. Claire suddenly screamed, clutching her head as if in pain. "It's inside my mind," she cried. It's trying to get in." Jake grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her. "Claire, snap out of it. We need to stay together." But it was too late. Claire's eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. Blood began to pour from her nose and ears, pooling on the floor around her. "Claire!" Lily screamed, rushing to her side, but there was nothing they could do. Claire's body convulsed one last time, then went still. Her eyes stared up at the ceiling, empty and lifeless. Mark was the first to react. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted, his voice tinged with hysteria. But the doors still wouldn't open. They were trapped in that room with whatever was in there with them. The figure had disappeared, but they could still feel its presence, lurking just out of sight. The temperature continued to drop, and the smell of blood grew stronger. Suddenly, the walls began to close in on them. The room was shrinking, the ceiling lowering, the walls pressing closer. Nate pulled out a crowbar from his backpack and began to pry at the doors. But it was no use. The wood splintered, but the doors remained firmly shut. And then the lights flickered back on. The room was empty, the symbols gone, the chair was gone. The walls were back to their original positions. There was no sign of Claire's body, just a dark stain on the floor where she had died. "What the hell just happened?" Lily whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice grim. "But we need to keep moving. There's something in here with us, and it's not going to let us leave." They moved quickly, leaving the room behind. The asylum was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one more decayed and decrepit than the last. The air was thick with the smell of mold and rot, and the walls were covered in graffiti and strange symbols. As they moved deeper into the building, the temperature continued to drop. Their flashlights flickered, the beams growing weaker and weaker. And then they heard it again, a low, guttural growl that echoed through the halls. "It's following us," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. Jake nodded. "We need to find a way out. Keep your eyes open for any doors or windows." But every door they tried was locked, every window boarded up. It was as if the asylum itself was alive, a malevolent force that was determined to keep them trapped inside. The growl grew louder, closer. They could feel it breathing down their necks, a cold, fetid breath that sent shivers down their spines. And then they saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the end of the corridor, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was the same figure from the ritual room, but now it was more defined, more real. They could see the twisted, distorted features of its face, the sharp claws that extended from its fingers. "Run!" Jake shouted, and they took off down the corridor, the figure close behind them. They turned a corner only to find themselves in a dead end. The walls were closing in on them again, the ceiling lowering. "We're trapped," Lily cried, her voice tinged with hysteria. Jake looked around, desperate for any way out. But there was nothing. No doors, no windows, no escape. The figure was getting closer, its growl turning into a low, menacing laugh. "We have to fight it," Jake said, pulling out a knife from his backpack. "It's the only way." Nate nodded, grabbing a piece of debris from the floor to use as a weapon. Lily picked up a metal pipe, her hands shaking. But Mark just stood there, frozen with fear. "We can't fight it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's not human. It's a demon, a monster. We're going to die here." "Shut up and fight," Jake shouted, and they charged at the figure, their weapons raised. But it was no use. The figure swatted them away like flies, its claws tearing through their flesh like butter. Nate was the first to go. The figure's claws sliced through his throat, severing his head from his body. Blood sprayed across the walls as his body collapsed to the floor, twitching violently. Lily screamed, swinging the pipe at the figure, but it was no use. The figure caught the pipe in its clawed hand, snapping it in half. It grabbed Lily by the throat, lifting her off the ground. She kicked and struggled, but it was no use. The figure tightened its grip, crushing her windpipe. Blood poured from her mouth as she gasped for air, her eyes rolling back in her head. And then, with a final, sickening crunch, the figure snapped her neck, dropping her lifeless body to the floor. Mark was next. He tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It caught him by the leg, dragging him back towards the dead end. He screamed, clawing at the floor. But it was no use. The figure's claws sliced through his flesh, ripping him apart piece by piece. Blood sprayed across the walls as his body was torn to shreds, his screams echoing through the halls. Jake was the last one standing. He raised his knife, ready to fight to the bitter end. But the figure was too strong, too fast. It swatted the knife out of his hand, grabbing him by the throat. Jake struggled, gasping for air, but it was no use. The figure tightened its grip, crushing his windpipe. Blood poured from his mouth as he gasped for air, his vision fading. And then, with a final sickening crunch, the figure snapped his neck, dropping his lifeless body to the floor. The asylum was silent once more, the only sound the faint dripping of blood from the walls. The figure stood over the bodies, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. And then, it was gone, leaving only the blood-soaked corpses behind. The next morning, the police arrived at the asylum, responding to a call from a concerned neighbor who had heard screams coming from the building. They found the bodies of the paranormal files team, their faces twisted in terror, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. But there was no sign of the figure, No trace of the shadowy presence that had stalked them through the halls. The asylum was sealed off, condemned as a crime scene. But the locals knew better. They knew that the asylum was cursed, haunted by the spirits of the mad and the damned. And they knew that anyone who entered would never leave alive. The story of the Paranormal Files team became a legend, a cautionary tale told around campfires and in hushed whispers. Some say that the footage they captured still exists, hidden away in the depths of the internet, waiting to be found. But those who have seen it say that it is cursed, that anyone who watches it will be haunted by the same shadowy figure that stalked the team through the halls of Broadmoor Asylum. And they say that once you've seen it, there's no escape. As the chilling echoes of the last tale linger in the air, let us delve into another shadowy corner of the night where the unknown waits with bated breath. Gather your courage, for the next story begins. The rain had been relentless since they arrived, pounding against the windows and drenching the solitary island in a perpetual gloom. 5 bloggers, each renowned in their own right, stood huddled under the grand archway of the old Victorian mansion. The towering lighthouse loomed behind them, its once guiding light now extinguished, casting long, eerie shadows over the desolate landscape. They had been invited by an anonymous sponsor promising an exclusive retreat to boost their content. The invitation boasted of mystery, adventure, and a chance to collaborate like never before. Intrigued and enticed, they accepted, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. Inside, the mansion was a relic frozen in time. Dusty chandeliers hung precariously from ornate ceilings, and faded portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something metallic and foreboding. Mia, a travel blogger known for her fearless explorations, shivered as she glanced around. "This place gives me the creeps," she muttered, pulling her leather jacket tighter around her slender frame. "Come on, it's just old," scoffed Derek, a thrill-seeker who made a living documenting extreme sports. His arrogance was as palpable as the storm outside. Lena, a soft-spoken culinary blogger, clutched her camera nervously. Beside her stood Jacob, a tech guru with a penchant for uncovering dark web mysteries, and Sam, a charismatic lifestyle vlogger whose smile rarely left his face. As they settled into the grand foyer, the heavy doors behind them slammed shut with a thunderous boom. The sound echoed through the empty halls, making them all jump. "What the hell?" Jacob spun around, tugging at the door handles, but they wouldn't budge. Panic flickered in his eyes. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Mia fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight app to cut through the blackness. A chilling, distorted voice crackled through hidden speakers, sending a wave of terror through the group. "Welcome, honored guests. Let the games begin." Before anyone could react, the floor beneath them gave way, and they plunged into darkness, screams swallowed by the void. Mia awoke to a throbbing pain in her head, the metallic taste of blood on her lips. She blinked, adjusting to the dim light emanating from a single bulb hanging overhead. They were in a damp, concrete chamber, walls slick with moisture, and something else she didn't want to identify. The others lay scattered around her, groaning and slowly regaining consciousness. Sam was the first to sit up, rubbing his temples. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, concern evident in his usually cheerful voice. "I've been better," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. Jacob examined the room, noting the heavy metal door with no visible handle, and a small grate in the ceiling where water dripped steadily, forming a shallow pool on the floor. Derek punched the wall in frustration. "This is some sick joke. When I find whoever did this—" The distorted voice interrupted him, echoing through unseen speakers. "Welcome to your first challenge. Only the strong survive. In the center of the room is a box. Inside, you'll find the tools necessary for this task. The rules are simple. Retrieve the key and you may leave. fail and face the consequences. They looked around, spotting a rusty metal box partially submerged in the water. Mia waded over, lifting the lid cautiously. Inside were 5 knives of varying sizes, each stained and worn. "This can't be serious," Lena murmured, backing away. Jacob's eyes narrowed. "It's a setup. He wants us to turn on each other." Derek grabbed one of the knives, testing its weight. "Well, I'm not planning to die here." Before anyone could react, the room began to fill with water pouring in from hidden pipes. The level rose rapidly, reaching their ankles in seconds. "There's no time," Sam shouted, frantically searching for any exit. Mia's gaze locked onto a small box attached high on the wall, a glint of metal visible through its grated cover. "The key must be in there." "How do we reach it?" Lena asked, panic rising in her voice as the water climbed higher. Derek smirked, gesturing with his knife. "Boost me up, and I'll get it." Mia hesitated but knew they had no choice. She and Sam interlaced their fingers, creating a makeshift step. Derek stepped onto their hands, reaching for the box as water surged past their waists. He pried at the grate, but it was secured tightly. "I need something to break it open." Jacob tossed him another knife. "Use this." Derek hammered at the grate, metal clashing against metal. Finally, it gave way, and he reached inside, pulling out a small, ornate key. "Got it!" he exclaimed triumphantly. But before he could be lowered down, a sudden jolt shook the room, and Derek lost his balance, plunging into the now chest-deep water. The key slipped from his grasp, disappearing beneath the murky surface. "No!" Mia dove underwater, frantically searching. The water was cold and filled with debris, stinging her eyes and clouding her vision. Sam and Jacob joined her, hands sweeping through the water desperately. Time was running out as the water neared the ceiling. "I can't find it," Jacob gasped, coming up for air. Lena, struggling to keep her head above water, suddenly felt something brush against her leg. She reached down, fingers closing around the cold metal of the key. "I have it!" she screamed, holding it up. They swam toward the metal door, but there was no keyhole in sight. "Where does it go?" Sam shouted, his voice muffled by the rising water. Mia's lungs burned as she dived again, feeling along the door until her fingers found a small, hidden slot. She jammed the key in and twisted. With a groan, the door swung open, and water rushed out, carrying them along a narrow passage until they spilled into another room, coughing and gasping for breath. They lay sprawled on the floor, soaked and exhausted but alive. The voice returned, mocking and cold. "Congratulations, you have passed the first test, but the night is young and so am I." The next room was larger, lit by flickering torches that cast dancing shadows across blood-stained walls. In the center stood a table laden with various items, a syringe filled with a dark liquid, a revolver with a single bullet, and a small, ornate box. The voice echoed once more. "Choose wisely. One offers freedom, one offers pain, and one offers death. Decide amongst yourselves who will choose." Silence hung heavy in the air as they contemplated their options. "We can't keep playing his sick games," Jacob muttered, eyes darting around for any sign of surveillance. "If we don't, we die," Mia replied bluntly. Derek stepped forward, wiping water from his face. "I'll do it. I'm not afraid." Lena grabbed his arm. "Wait, we should think this through." He shrugged her off, eyes fixed on the table. "Thinking will get us killed. Action saves lives." He approached the table, eyeing each item carefully. His hand hovered over the revolver before moving to the syringe. "Are you sure about this?" Sam asked, concern etched on his face. Derek smirked, picking up the syringe. "What's life without a little risk?" Before anyone could stop him, he plunged the needle into his arm, injecting the mysterious liquid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, convulsing violently. Lena screamed, rushing to his side, but Mia held her back. We don't know what's happening. Derek's body contorted unnaturally, veins bulging and skin turning a sickly shade of gray. Blood foamed at his mouth as his spasms grew more violent, then suddenly stopped. His body lay still, eyes staring lifelessly at the ceiling. The voice chuckled darkly. It seems he chose poorly. Tears streamed down Lena's face as she looked away, unable to bear the sight. Jacob's jaw tightened. This is madness. Mia's eyes hardened. We have to keep going. For Derek. Sam nodded solemnly, stepping towards the table. I'll go next. He eyed the remaining items, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for the box. It was intricately carved, depicting scenes of angels and demons intertwined in battle. He opened it cautiously, revealing a small silver key and a note that read, "Freedom lies within." A door on the opposite wall creaked open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. Sam's face broke into a relieved grin. We did it. But as he turned to share the news, a shot rang out, echoing through the chamber. Sam's eyes widened in shock as blood blossomed across his chest. He staggered back, collapsing to the ground. Behind him stood Jacob, the smoking revolver clutched in his trembling hand. What have you done? Mia screamed, rushing to Sam's side. His breaths were shallow, blood pooling beneath him. Jacob's face was pale, eyes wild. I didn't want to. The gun, it moved on its own. The voice cackled, reveling in their despair. Deception is a powerful tool. Trust no one. Mia glared at Jacob, fury and grief battling within her. Stay away from us. Lena, sobbing uncontrollably, cradled Sam's head as his breathing slowed, then stopped altogether. The room fell silent, save for the distant rumble of thunder and the steady drip of water. Now only three remained. They walked down the corridor, the weight of loss heavy on their shoulders. The passage led them to a circular room, dominated by a massive glass cage, suspended above a pit of darkness. Inside the cage was a lever, and beneath it, another note. One must sacrifice for others to survive. The voice returned, colder than before. This is your final test. One must enter the cage and pull the lever. The others will be set free. But know this, the one who pulls the lever will not return. Mia looked at Lena and Jacob, their faces pale and eyes haunted. I'll do it, Lena whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks. No, Mia protested, you've been through enough. Jacob stepped forward, guilt evident in his eyes. It should be me. After what happened, I have to make it right. Mia hesitated, conflicted. Trust had been shattered, but sacrifice was noble. Before a decision could be made, the floor beneath them began to retract, revealing spikes glinting ominously below. Decide quickly, the voice taunted. Mia took a deep breath, resolve hardening within her. I'll go. She stepped toward the cage, but Jacob grabbed her arm. Number, let me. Their eyes met, and for a moment understanding passed between them. Mia nodded slowly. Be careful. Jacob entered the cage, the glass door sealing behind him. He approached the lever, hands shaking. Taking a deep breath, he pulled it down. Alarms blared as the cage began to lower into the abyss. Simultaneously, a door behind Mia and Lena slid open, revealing the stormy night outside. It's open. We can leave, Lena exclaimed, hope flickering in her eyes. But Mia's gaze remained fixed on Jacob as the darkness swallowed him whole. A final scream echoed up before silence claimed the chamber. Tears blurred Mia's vision as she and Lena stumbled toward freedom, the cold rain pelting them as they emerged into the open. They made their way to the dock where a small boat awaited, engine idling as if expecting them. Climbing aboard, they set off into the turbulent sea, the island fading into the mist behind them. Days later, Mia sat alone in her apartment, the events replaying endlessly in her mind. The police had found no trace of their captor, dismissing much of their account as hysteria. Lena had returned to her family, seeking solace and healing. As Mia stared out the window at the setting sun, her phone buzzed with a new email notification. Opening it, she froze as she read the subject line. "Congratulations on surviving." The email contained a single video attachment. With trembling fingers, she played it. The screen flickered to life, revealing a dimly lit room filled with monitors displaying footage from the mansion. A figure stepped into view, face obscured by shadows, but his voice unmistakable, the same distorted tone that had haunted them on the island. "Well done, Mia. You've passed my test. The world now knows your strength, your will to survive, and soon they'll see much more." The figure leaned closer, and for a brief moment, lightning illuminated his face. Mia's blood ran cold as she recognized him. It was Sam. "But he's dead," she whispered, heart pounding. Sam's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Death is merely an illusion in the grand design. Until we meet again." The video ended abruptly, leaving Mia engulfed in silence and dread. The shadows in her room seemed to grow longer, darker, as realization settled in. The nightmare was far from over. So, brave souls, our journey in the shadows is coming to an end for tonight. We hope that these stories have stirred your imagination and given you goosebumps. Remember, the world is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, and the line between reality and the supernatural is thinner than you might think. If you enjoyed today's stories and want to hear more creepy and unexplained, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you will be the first to know about new stories of horror and intrigue. Click on the bell icon so you don't miss a single creepy story. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some doors are better left unopened.